In loving memory of my dad, the woodsman, Rex Mann, 1944 until 2025, who took his last breath shortly after filming this episode. I miss you, Pop. See you on the other side. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. It's a solo episode, and I think one that will resonate with you, particularly in the times that we're living in right now. The title of this podcast episode is Communities in Chaos. And as we're recording this right now, I think that's an appropriate title. And this conversation today is going to be about chaos. It's going to be about complexity. It's going to be about many of the things that you're seeing as a parent, as a leader, as just a human in the communities where you live, work, and play. But also, I want to talk about what we can do about it as bottom-up leaders, as rooftop leaders, as leaders who are just trying to, get up in the morning and do the right thing and make an impact in the world and leave things maybe a little bit better than we found it for our kids. Speaking of that, I just got back at the filming of this just a few days, last night. I got back from Kentucky, where I've been spending time with my dad, Rex, who he and my mom, Anita, are really going through it right now, as I'm sure many of your parents or maybe some of you watching have gone through health-wise. My dad is really struggling. He's my hero. He and my mom both. My dad, very active in my career. He's a wildland firefighter, almost 43 years in the Forest Service, fighting big fires out west. You've heard me talk about him a lot. You've heard me write about him in my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, on Leaving Tracks. I've talked about him on the TED stage. I mean, my parents were both very influential in my life. My dad, as a male figure in my life, just played and plays a very big role, and he's my hero. And so it's very difficult to watch him go through what he's going through right now. Third bout with cancer. We think maybe it's back for a fourth round, and it's devastating. And so it's really taking him down. 81 years old almost, and I went up there because we didn't know if he was going to make it. He went into that hospital, white blood cell count really low, didn't know if he was going to make it, and that's what I just made this trip for, was thinking this was my last time to see my dad. I got to spend gratefully more time with him than I thought, and he's around a little longer than we thought, but he's under assault from cancer and a range of other things. And we were watching television. We were watching 24/7 news. I'll leave it at that. If you know my dad, you know which channel. But it doesn't matter because it's 24/7 news, and he was watching it. And it was literally, I don't watch the news much anymore at all, really. And it was like watching the world burn for a number of minutes. And we're, watching this. And I looked over at my dad as we're doing this, and I just, the profound sadness on his face as he watched this. It was, I don't even know how to describe it, really. And his eyes were watering up, and it, what they were talking about were the riots in the country. They were talking about the division in the country. They were talking about the rumblings of war in the Middle East again. I mean, it just, one thing after another, that was just describing this churn of division and distrust. And I sat there with him, and we talked a little bit about it, and he just had this echo of profound sadness in his voice. And the thing is, like, my dad has always been this super upbeat guy. He is the most patriotic American, and I mean, in just a love everybody, sweetest man. I mean, all the years, 56 years I've been on this earth, he's never raised his voice at me one time, like not once. And I gave him plenty of reasons to. That's just the kind of guy he is. And he's always, believes in this country and really in society. Always finds the good in people. And just looking at the look on his face as we were watching this unfolding. And again, like there's a lot going on. There's violence in the streets. Marines and National Guard have been deployed. Pallets of bricks are being dropped. People on both sides of the aisle are screaming at each other. There's pretty much a level of division and distrust. And people speaking of each other, as Sebastian Junger says, with contempt, normally reserved for one's enemies. Contempt normally reserved for one's enemies. And Junger in the book Tribe goes on to say that, married couples who speak of each other with contempt are not to stay together long. And I believe that societies that speak of their neighbor with contempt are not long of this earth. And I think my dad, as he watched that, knows this, because he's a very wise man. And I think in his latter years and in the twilight of his life, there is a wisdom that perhaps is even being gifted to him. And he's just worried about us, man. He's worried about you and me. He's worried about the people he's worried about our kids. And I am too. I am worried about our kids. I'm worried about, Colin, who sits behind this camera, right? Who lost his mom at a very young age and who is stepping into this world now to lead. I'm worried about my boys, two of whom are in government service. There's a line from the play Last Out where my character, Master Sergeant Danny Patton, the protagonist in the war, is so worried about his son joining the Army that he says to his wife, Lynn, about when their parents fought in Vietnam and people threw dog shit at him at the airport. And he says to Lynn, Lynn, how long do you think those yellow ribbons out here before they turn back into dog shit? And only this time they're going to be throwing it at your son. I wrote that years ago, but is that not what we're facing now? And it's not just dog shit, it's bricks and rocks, Molotov cocktails. And, whatever you want to say about what side you are on this, those are American police officers. Those are American Marines and National Guardsmen, the same ones that were in the previous administration and the administration before that. Most of these who serve a career serve under multiple administrations, Republican and Democrat. Yet we, as a civil society, have evolved to the point where we will enter into a trance state, and all of a sudden, those National Guardsmen or police officers or whoever who were just previously protectors are now enemies of the state or enemies of our ideology. Both sides are guilty of it. And I just wonder, are those not our children? Are those not our husbands and wives and sons and daughters, parents? Speaking of our neighbors with contempt normally reserved for one's enemies and now demonstrating it in action indeed. Now, you can sit around with your moral equivocation all day long or your rigidity of ideology and tell me that that's okay. But I'm sorry, as a father of two sons who serve this nation, that's not okay. That's not okay, because what they're doing is stepping into the breach and representing a collective civil society. We're the ones that are not okay. Like, we're the ones that are getting it wrong. And dividing ourselves into in-groups and out-groups and following divisionist leaders on both sides of the aisle who foment an instability so pervasive that we look at each other through tribal lenses versus what used to be out of many come one, a pluribus unum, right? Or what Alexander de Tocqueville from France in the 1800s came over to see this experiment called democracy in the United States and said, Americans have an individualism that is rightly understood. I mean, what happened? But the reality is we are in churn. What I talk about in my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. We are in a profound place of churn. Can we agree to that? I mean, can we agree that there are a novel set of conditions that are facing us today that we've just never seen before? We haven't. There is, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity that exists in the arena where we live, work, and play. The levels of distraction. My God, the attention span's like 8 seconds for people. The disengagement, 85% of the population is disengaged or lacks purpose, and we're meaning-seeking creatures. We're supposed to seek and assign meaning in what we do. The levels of disconnection, we're so disconnected from ourselves. We're disconnected from our own nature, our own human operating system. You know, we walk around in a state where we're not even connected to our traditional past anymore. You know, storytelling has gone the way of the dinosaur in favor of PowerPoint and podiums and sound bites. And internally, I think this is where it's the most alarming for all of us, is what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance, right? That internal negative energy, that self-sabotage that permeates our bodies as we face all of these external stressors. You know, that's a real thing, is this self-sabotage. Now, you know, it might show up as imposter syndrome. That's what it does for me when I am writing a book, or even right now as I sit in front of you thinking, oh man, like, what are they thinking? Am I even the right person to be talking? I shouldn't even be talking about this. I'm not the person to do this. Somebody else should do this. Like, I've been dealing with that for years, and I know some of you do too, but that's just resistance. That's resistance putting itself between myself and a higher goal that I have for myself. We have positive and negative energy coursing through us. As Professor James Clausen says, leadership is the management of energy. So there is a negative energy that we have to contend with. Pressfield calls it resistance. It could show up as over-medicating, over-sexing, procrastination, but the reality is resistance, that internal self-sabotage that manifests as tension in the body, and the sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze, where we literally lose our frontal cortex for reasoning. Those are all real things internally that happen in this time of churn. So it's not just the external gaps and division that we have between us and then we're trying to reach communities, parties, you name it, right? It's also internally our own resistance and us pulling ourselves back, because when the resistance starts to manifest itself as tension in the body and we start to judge ourselves, because we're social creatures, so we're constantly assessing our status in the presence of other members of our circle, we pull back. You know, that's what stage fright is. When you have to get in front of people, it is truly worse than death as a fear for many people. Why? Because we are status creatures at a bloodline level, at a biological level, and we are fearful for how we'll be judged. So, and then you add in, these dopamine dispensers that we walk around with, whether it's a Droid or an iPhone or iPad, and we are completely giving our agency away to a digital realm that is two-dimensional, right? And is designed by architects, for the most part, to foment instability through in-group and out-group behavior. It's an attention-based economy to hold your attention and create as many shares and likes as possible by giving you grouped content that is fear-based and anger-based information about an out-group. It's the fucking oldest trick in the book, man. It's just done in a digital fashion. All of those things conspire to create what I call the churn in the book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. And it's what I view it as the antagonist to what you and I are dealing with as parents, as leaders, as business owners, athletes, coaches. So what do we do about it? Have I done a good enough job of framing the problem? I hope so. Have I done a good enough job of framing what my dad feels that sadness for? Because it is novel, it is new. I've been studying human dynamics and civil society for a lot of years. I'm not alone in that. There are a lot of people who do, but I like to think that my body of work is very eclectic, because it ranges from, Green Beret to veteran advocacy, to small business owner, to nonprofit founder, playwright, author. And so I try to really take that eclectic, holistic look at civil society with the emphasis I learned as a Green Beret from some very great Green Beret sergeants about how to think about your operational environment. The first special ops imperative is understand your operational environment. And, that's absolutely right. I think that's true for all of us. And what I'm seeing is a novel set of conditions we've never seen before. This is an unprecedented set of social conditions that I call the churn, in our arena, in our human terrain and how we behave, and internally our own resistance. And if we don't understand that, then we don't understand our operational environment. And we're asleep at the switch, really. And we are, and you are, vulnerable to the exploitation and manipulation of divisionist leaders who would advance and mobilize your fear and your anger in the service of a narrow agenda versus the broader agenda of a nation or a community. That seems terrible. But I ask you, set your party aside and just look at politics today. And when is the last time you actually heard a politician utter, out of many come one? And remind us of it. I heard a quote once, and I don't know the source, that people hate to be told what to do, but they love to be reminded of what's important. That seems very important to me. But when's the last time you heard someone remind us of it? I can't even remember. Well, that's a lot of doom and gloom. But I think it's necessary to frame the problem, right? We got to know what we're up against. So let's spend the rest of our time together talking about what the hell we do about it. Because I am an optimist. I'm a guarded optimist, right, Colin? A guarded optimist, but I am an optimist, and I do believe that there is a pathway forward. I know there is. I've spent 12 years out of the military working and building communities of practice and communities around hard problems. And I am unequivocally convinced that there is a pathway forward, not just for you and me as individuals, but as communities, as collectives, as a civil society. Whether you reside in the UK or Australia or Afghanistan or here, depending on where you are, it's going to be, contextually harder than other places. But we got our work cut out for us in the old US of A. And I do believe that the title of my book, Nobody is Coming to Save You, is appropriately named. I do. And I'm gonna share a few points from it. But I think going back to, people ask me, why did I call it that? And there's different reasons, honestly. Some of it inspired by Green Beret team sergeants that aren't around anymore. Some of it from the spirit of what Green Berets have to do in at-risk remote places when nobody's coming. They have to get big shit done. But honestly, I think for me, it's just the acceptance. Honestly, my buddy Bo Eason, I think, coined this term when he said nobody's coming. Several years ago, I heard him say it in the context in which he was saying it was, what if nobody's coming? Like, what if it's just us? What if we're the only leaders here that actually can behave responsibly and step up for that? And that really resonated with me. And I'm going to tell you why I did, was because I've seen that. I've seen it in village stability operations in Afghanistan, where a small handful of Green Berets and other special operators mobilized communities to stand up against the Taliban when it seemed impossible. I've seen communities come together around the Afghanistan withdrawal when there were no other answers present. I've seen communities come together around a play that probably never should have been written or never should have had a chance in the world, but yet they did, and it did. Ended up being produced by Gary Sinise, called Last Out. So I've just seen it over and over again. I've seen these examples in microcosms, but probably, the best example is a story that's put forward by Robert Putnam in his book Bowling Alone, that later was advanced again in a newer book called The Upswing. And some of you guys have heard me talk about this on the podcast, but Putnam, and I'll remind us of what he said, but he talked about a period of time in American history when it was very dark. It was very dark times in the country. It was tough, man. We were up against it. The economy was not good. There was mass migration from the farms to the cities. There was mass immigration that was overwhelming the infrastructure and capacity of our country. There was crime rampant in the streets. Leaders were on the take. There was a massive disparity between the haves and the have-nots. It looked bleak. It looked bad. And a lot of pundits were writing in the newspaper
that this was the end of days for America. And not long after that, not even after that, during that period, a couple of drunks in Akron, Ohio, we'll call them Dr. Bob and Bill W., decided to have a meeting. And they had a meeting because they couldn't get sober in any institution that they went to. Everywhere they went, the institutions just couldn't get it done. And they were diagnosed as chronically alcoholic and doomed to die. But they decided to have a meeting and talk about sobriety. And they did. And they talked about sobriety. They talked about getting sober. And they talked about steps that they could take to get sober. The first one, just admitting that you have a problem and that you're powerless over alcohol. And they agreed that they would only meet with other alcoholics. And they would, because civil society had such a disdain for addiction and alcoholism, that they decided to remain somewhat in the shadows in terms of how they helped each other. And they saw great results almost immediately with one another, and then a few more, and then a few more, and on it went, and ultimately became Alcoholics Anonymous. A program that is still around today, has helped millions of people find sobriety. It has led to getting clean out of addiction, other 12-step programs around overeating and sex and you name it. I lead with that story because one of the beneficiaries of those two drunks having that meeting in Akron, Ohio, is me. I'll be 25 years sober this December. And a lot of people, including my wife, never thought I would even be sitting here today. And my boys never really had to have any conscious memory of it, even though I was terribly sick with that disease when they were little. It's a miracle, but I'm here. And millions of other people are here because of one little meeting in Akron, Ohio, between two drunks that the institutions could not help. But it wasn't just that happened during that dark period. The Junior League, right, that empowered women to do so much for civil society. The Rotary Club that helped give voices to small businesses birthed out of Chicago or the suburbs of Chicago. Future Farmers of America, the NAACP, the Shriners Club, the Lions Club, the Elks Club, the National Park Service. Pretty much every bottom-up movement and community that was formed at grassroots level that we know and understand today was formed between 1900 and 1920. It's what Robert Putnam refers to as the upswing. We went from this downswing to an upswing. And when I read that, it sounded so similar to where we are today. And it resonated so much with me as I was coming out of the military that I thought, damn, I know exactly what this is because I saw versions of this in Afghanistan with Green Berets that were building communities there, bottom up. And I fell in love with that idea. I fell in love with the idea that in chaos, communities are the antibody. Communities are the antibody to chaos. They always have been. I mean, Sebastian Junger writes about this in Tribe. In fact, he goes so far to say that if there's anything that saves us from this cliff that we're moving off of by treating each other with contempt, it is community. It is the ultimate antibody. And so for the rest of the time that we have here, I mean, one, I just want you to know we've been here before. There is macro level precedent in the United States, in the Western world, for a downswing, which is what we're in now, unprecedented, going to a massive upswing that, by the way, lasted all the way from 1900 to 1920 when it started to 1972 when we started to go downswing again with the Vietnam War, with a lot of the mass technology that brought television and other things into homes, suburbanization. There's a range of indicators that social scientists talk about where we started to trend down again, starting in 1972, which, by the way, Gallup's poll of Do You Trust Your Neighbor also started to show that we started to drop in 72, 73. Trust in Congress started to drop. Trust in other institutions like banking started to drop, the media. And it's been a downswing ever since. But if we're not careful, what we focus on is we just focus on the downswing because it's all we remember. But the reality is, if you stretch the timeline out, there's a macro level precedent of an upswing. And it honestly tells us a lot about what we need to know. If you want to read the books on it, and pack a lunch, brother and sister, because they are long. Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, and The Upswing are two. And there's a lot of data, but I've just synthesized it for you. And I guess my good news message here is there is an antibody to this, and it is community. And by the way, not only we still need our institutions, right? Everybody got super excited during the Afghanistan withdrawal at the veterans groups that stood up and, did their best, but they couldn't come anywhere close to what the U.S. government could typically do in an evacuation if it was focused on it and did it the right way. But they weren't. So you had these veterans groups that stepped in. But my message today, like when I went to D.C. with a handful of other global war on terror veterans, was, look, we did the best we could. We need the institutions to still work the immigration of allies that we made a promise to that are being executed, right? That's still a need, even though there's a blanket immigration policy above that. You can't just abandon these people. That's wrong. And we're doing that. This administration is doing that. So I guess what kind of lost my place there. But I guess what I'm saying here is that community really is it is the antibody. And there's so much that is available to us if we just leverage it, if we just tap into it. But there's examples of it ranging, all the way to very recently. But we must understand it's not just community, it's institutions too. But that's where I was going with this, is in the early 1900s, what happened was a lot of these movements that started with the Junior League, the Rotary Club, there was pressure put from the bottom up on these institutions to do the right thing. Again, our National Park Service and much of the reform that the Teddy Roosevelt's regime did was because of bottom-up social pressure. So we're very capable of this. And I hope that serves as a clarion call to lend airspeed to the things like what Ben and Jess Owen are doing. Look at what they're doing to bring attention to illegal trafficking of humans, homelessness, veteran homelessness, addiction, turning dope houses into hope houses. They are creating a movement, are they not? One other thing that I'll say about this that I think we have to call out here and take stock of is that there's never been a time for better access to platforms to do this. I mean, you think about the early 1900s, what did you have? Right? You literally had the bully pulpit, right? You had the megaphone, you had the newspaper, and good luck getting anything in the newspaper back then. You literally had town halls. You had, the pulpit. You had the opportunity to engage one-on-one in small groups, and if you were lucky, maybe a forum or a gathering, but that was it. And look at the massive strategic change that was put in place. I mean, literally every organization that we understand and that our parents understood as bridging social capital organizations like Rotary, like Junior League, like the Elks Club, YMCA, all of those that filled the gaps that institutions couldn't, they started during that period. Imagine what we can do now with this technology, right? I mean, this podcast is a prime example only because it is a podcast, not because of the quality of the host. Although there are so many podcasts out there, and I've heard some people say, some of your more accomplished podcasters like, God, these amateurs on these podcasts, what the hell are they even doing? And it's like, well, hold on a minute, man. I mean, first of all, the last time I checked, at least in, our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, we do have a guarantee to say what we have to say. And what a blessing that we have these kinds of platforms to do that. If you have 5 followers or if you have 5 million, The reality is there's never been more of an opportunity to amplify your voice bottom up. Now, you got to have game and you got to have content. And I think you've got to have the rigor to hold attention that is normally 8 seconds or less than that on social media, right? For people swiping in whatever direction. But you have access. We have it in this little room here with this wall of honor behind me from the play and this burned American flag that legends rescued in Afghanistan creates a platform by which we can talk about human connection. We can talk about this, and I'm reaching people. I'm astounded by the number of people that I reach that I never thought I'd be able to reach, who I didn't know they were listening to this podcast, and it blows me away, and especially when they tell me what it means to them or what they took away from it or how they employed something from it. So we have, I guess where I'm going with this is we have this unprecedented, not only do we have macro level precedent of community overcoming chaos in this country, but we also have access and placement within the technology realm for amplification of voice that we've never had before, ever. You know, the internet and these types of digital platforms has given us a voice like never before. The question is, will we use it responsibly? And whether that's on a podcast, whether that's on a LinkedIn Live, or whether that's in a blog or a newsletter or going on 24/7 news or whatever, it's available to us. And this is something that I'm telling people all the time is like, if you see, look at what Ben and Jess are doing. Again, I'll just cite them, the work that they're doing, or my friend Courtney, who's part of the Scott Mann Leadership Academy. She lost her spouse to suicide, and it had a devastating impact on her and her daughter. And she's creating a movement around helping our children cope with suicide, a kid's book and a nonprofit. I mean, my goodness, from the depths and bowels of tragedy and loss emerges the exact kind of thing that Dr. Bob and Bill W. brought forward with AA, but now at scale. And you tell me that's not getting easy. I don't know how you can. The question is, what are we going to do with it? Can we handle it responsibly? So what I thought I would do is wrap this podcast up with some thoughts and hopefully best practices that I've learned in my couple of decades of working around human connection, building relationships and social capital, right? What Putnam calls the tangible and intangible linkages between humans that allow us to get big shit done. Yeah. Social capital is the oldest form of capital in the world. In fact, I'm going to give you a little quote here from Putnam in my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, right before chapter 6, when I talk about the social dynamics of leadership. Or connecting like your life depends on it. This is from Putnam, and in Bowling Alone, he had said before this passage, he talked about how there's really no evidence in data that he's seen, and he's examined a ton, that there's a correlate between money and happiness. That was his first point. It's like, you can look, but I've seen no really hardcore data that shows me that there's a correlation between money and happiness. And then he begins this passage. The single most common finding from a half-century's research on the correlates of life satisfaction, not only in the U.S., but around the world, is that happiness is best predicated by the breadth and depths of one's social connections. I'll read that part again. Happiness is best predicated by the breadth and depth of one's social connection. So it's not surprising then, is it, that my 81-year-old dad, who built his life around relationships and social connections, his happiness is waning as he sees the breadth and depth of our social connections in America become so narrow and so thumbnail thin. It makes sense. It makes sense when veterans look around and say what Sebastian Junger says in the book Tribe, that most combat veterans are more than willing to die for their country. They just don't know how to live for it. And he goes on to say that it's hard to know how to live for a country that's tearing itself apart along every imaginable line, from race to politics to religion. Because happiness is based on and predicated upon the breadth and depth of one's social connections. So how do we lead through that? How do we get back to that? How do we get to that antibody in this time of complete churn? So a few thoughts that I have on that. 3 things that I'm going to talk about here. And I hope they serve you. The first one is beware of the trance. Beware of the trance. You've heard me talk about this, and I'm gonna revisit it right now. You know, Dr. Ivan Tyrrell, one of my favorite people on the planet, the author of The Human Givens, a wonderful psychiatrist, and frankly, thought leader. He's got a recent piece out. Colin, can you remind me? We'll put it in the show notes. I want to get him on the show. If I have to go to the UK, you want to go to the UK? Yeah. All right. So we're going to get him on the show. Dr. Ivan Tyrrell, a phenomenal dude. And he wrote this book, The Human Givens, which closely follows what I talk about with the iceberg, the human operating system. Basically that we have these innate physiological needs and emotional needs that if they're not met, we are not only unhappy, but we are just untended and untethered in this world. And he's done a ton of research on this. There's a Human Givens Institute, if you want to check that out, .org. And he's also got a book, it's a PDF out on the human givens basically in politics and how we need to bring human nature and human connection back into how we deal with each other in politics. In other words, how we treat each other around the issues versus the issues themselves. So, where the hell else was I going with that? Man, it's tough getting old. Anyway, the trance state. Dr. Ivan Tyrrell tells us that when we get angry or afraid and we go to a heightened emotional state, our frontal cortex shuts down. We go into survival mode, our 250,000-year-old primal state of fight, flight, or freeze. There's a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, and I got to deal with it. So the body, we're mostly energy. Energy overrides the frontal cortex, and our capacity and propensity for logical thought, human connection goes out the window, man. We are in survival mode, aren't we? We're just trying to survive. And so it overrides. That's a neural override, and we are just focused on showing cuspids and surviving. That trance state is totally appropriate for a saber-toothed tiger. It is not appropriate, a trance state, for an immigration discussion. Right? Trance state is not appropriate for discussion on an election. Those are first world civil society of abundance outcomes and issues, right? Designed, as Madison, one of the founders, made very clear, designed for civil discourse and respect. If you look at what the founders had in mind, it is not mob rule. It is not in-group, out-group behavior. Hell, that's what they were coming from. And tyranny, right? And the problem is when you go into trance state, I don't care if your house is burning and your children are inside or your 401k is eroding at the onset of COVID. The old lizard brain, the amygdala, overrides everything, and we go into that fear, fight, flight, or freeze state of the sympathetic nervous system, and you look like you don't trust yourself to the humans across from you, and you are literally looking at life through a soda straw. You know what I'm talking about. You know it. You feel it in your blood memory. You know when someone jumps out at you and scares you, like that shock that you have, or if you get in a confrontation with somebody, you know, and you start to bow up on them and you start to square off, or you start to slice on them if you're trained, right? Like all of those things are manifestations of a trance state. And when we go into a trance state, we surrender our agency. We surrender our autonomy for logical thought and human connection. And we go into survival mode. And we are literally dealing with the person across from us as an enemy, as a threat. And our ability for civil discourse and interaction is reduced to nothing. And as Dr. Ivan Tyrrell says, anger makes us stupid. Now just look around the country today. Look around at what's going on and ask yourself how many people are falling into the trance state. Now, is there some bad shit going on? Absolutely. Are there bad actors? Absolutely. Right? And I'm not on this podcast right now to get into who's right, who's wrong. I'm not. There's enough of that. And frankly, another thing that Dr. Ivan Tyrrell, Ian McGilchrist, John Bell, really forward thinkers who understand the human operating system and human connection warn us about is rigidity of thought. In this modern time that we live in today, not only does so when the trance state comes up, you know, one of the things when we start to blame people, right? Blaming is just, it is actually an outpouring of fear and frustration. because you don't know what to do with it. So we blame in-group, out-group behavior, rigidity of thought, where there's no context, there's no flexibility in the thinking, right? 24/7 news foments this massively. You know, some of the social media platforms actually are designed by the architects to hold your attention in an attention-based economy and get you to share and like more by putting you into in-groups and then presenting you with content about out-groups that's fear-based or anger-based, because they know the cortex will shut down and you'll just keep sharing and you'll go into that digital killing field, right? All of that is trance state behavior. And my message to you is, regardless of your politics, regardless of your position on things, when you surrender your agency to the trance state, no matter how justified you think you are, unless you are fighting for your life or saving your children from a burning car, you are surrendering your position as well. Because once you go into that position, you make the other person a straight up antagonist in what you're trying to do. Your ability to influence is zero. Your only tool left is coercion. And if the only tool in your kit bag is a hammer, then every fucking problem you face is going to look like a nail. And is that not where we are today in politics? Is that not where we are today in leadership? Is that not what our children are seeing us do? We are teaching our children that the only tool available to you is a hammer. Now, are there hammers needed? Yes. Like, I spent my career in special forces. And granted, not nearly as much as a lot of other people, or immersed in, and certainly have a lot to learn. But I do know enough about unconventional warfare to know that you do need the hammer at times. And in this country, there are bad actors who are violating the Constitution and who are violating our very existence. But if the only tool in your kit bag is a hammer or the application of coercion, then every problem is going to look like a nail. And my case here is that we are allowing ourselves to drop into the trance state of fight, flight, or freeze, of anger and fear, where the frontal cortex is shutting down. Our capacity for a discourse and logical thought is gone, and we are now susceptible to manipulation by divisionist leaders, by bad actors, by divisionist leaders whose very definition is not out of many come one, is not to bridge beyond in-groups and out-groups, which is what you would expect in a constitutional republic or a democracy. It is rather to foment the instability in advancement of their narrow agenda. And then folks will say, yeah, man, that's absolutely right. And those fucking Republicans or those damn Democrats. And once again, that's the trance, right? You've surrendered the high ground completely, because that's not an issue-based discussion. There may be merit in what you're saying, but your rigidity of thought, my rigidity of thought, is such that I've done away with context. There's no context in the discussion. And again, as Terrell says, as John Bell says, without context, there's nothing. Right? We're just being played. So I say, beware of the trance, man. Just beware of the trance. I did a LinkedIn newsletter. Maybe we can put the link for that, Colin, as well, on some tips because we can all do that. And like, look, even if you are on the front lines of some of the really rough stuff that's going on in the country today, and I don't envy some of the leaders that are having to deal with all of this on both sides of the aisle, because we got to find a way through it. But you still got to manage the trance state. You still have to, leadership is the management of energy, yours and those around you, and putting on your own oxygen mask first is critical. Diaphragmatic breathing is one of the best things that I've seen. Dr. Belisa Veronich in her book, Breathe, but just a good belly breath where you expand your belly on the inhale and then squeeze belly to spine on the exhale. Eyes closed, stepping away from the chaos, 3 to 5 of those, or just a good exhale breath like Jesse Torgerson teaches us on The Last Outcast, which is an inhale, and then just let go on the exhale with sound. Any of those can help metabolize tension, and tension is the enemy. Tension actually is where all of this manifests in the body. Like, as we go into the trance state, we tense up, we brace, and then we really start to radiate, and that accelerates. The body doing that accelerates and sends that signal to the brain. The vagus nerve sends that signal. Houston, we have a problem. Fight, flight, or freeze. Well, we can unwind that tension. just through breath, just through removing ourselves away from the problem. Get outside. Like my dad, Rex, says, if you want to get back to your nature, get back to you want to get back to human nature, get back to your nature, right? Just getting outside. One of my buddies who's a combat veteran texted me yesterday. He's like, dude, I'm going through it right now. I'm had a panic attack. I'm feeling it like PTS is rocking. I said, just go for a walk, man. Get outside and go for a walk. It does make a difference. And while, just movement is another way to reduce tension and the trance. Movement and meaning are inextricably linked, as it says in the Human Given. So those are just some thoughts on the trance state. And again, sometimes we try to fix the problem and we go so global when in reality, we are in a trance state. Right. I just had some email exchanges and text exchanges on a terrible challenge we've had with the Gathering Storm book. My God, the fulfillment has been terrible. And we dropped the ball, a lot of it. And so I've failed in that. And I'm dealing with folks that are not happy. It's not fun. It sucks. It's embarrassing. I'm dealing with folks on the team that are not happy. I put them in positions they never should have been put in outside of their unique genius. They're upset. But you know what it does? If I'm not careful, it makes me upset. Like it takes me into a trance state. And I train my ass off not to do that. But we're like an EKG report on this all the time. We're not like a bell curve. So it's about, okay, I'm in that place. I need to step away from it, get outside, go for a little walk, do some diaphragmatic breathing or a let go breath, and drop back into a parasympathetic state. Go from fight, flight, or freeze to calm and connect, rest and digest. Now we start to open up. Now we start to become available. Now we start to become a potential catalyst to navigate through the problem. That's why I'm telling leaders today, for me, it's so bad in the churn, I would focus less on the issue in the beginning and more about how you treat each other in the issue. Because if the other party is in a sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze, they're not ready to listen to what you have to say anyway. They physiologically, their ears don't work. They're in survival mode. Right. So, and if you're the one like in the trance state, you look like you don't trust yourself. So you're not convincing anybody of shit, whether that's an argument with your spouse or whether that's on the floor of Congress. So we all have an innate responsibility to manage our own energy and drop into that state. All right. So that's number one. Beware of the trance. Number two is, I like to use avatars and metaphors for thinking about how I want to lead or how I want to do something or how I want to tell a story, learn a new skill, because the brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ, right? So here's 3 that I put in the book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. I always talk about from the stage. And even when I taught for a few years at the captain's course in the Special Forces qualification course, I would talk about what is a modern day Green Beret in this time of churn, because you're dealing with all these weird things and you've got to go into places that are low trust, high stakes, very violent, and yet you have to build relationships. You have to go in with 12 and come out with 1,200. And the guy that you've got to do that with is an elder that's pissed off, lost his nephew to a bombing attack 6 months before you got there, and he's got a cup of green tea to his right and an AK-47 to his left. Which one's he going to reach for? Well, that depends on how you connect in that moment, doesn't it? So what I say modern day Green Berets have to be is a combination of John Wick, Lawrence of Arabia, and the Verizon guy. John Wick, obviously, for obvious reasons, the world's a violent place. And it's violence in that context, but in the world you live in where, you go to work 9 to 5 or you own a business or you're an athlete, I'm not talking about violence necessarily. I'm talking about coercion. But is it not true that everywhere you look, there's just coercion everywhere? People are in a trance state. So it's coercion. It's, I said so, damn it. That's why. You know what I mean? Or instead of like having discourse over a political issue on LinkedIn, you just go right to the jugular in their identity. Well, you're an idiot. Right? You're a leftist or you're a conservative. You're a neocon. You know what I mean? We go right to identity and we label that person in an out group. That is a manifestation of a trance state, right? And so when that happens, we've got to deal with that, right? But the point here is if your only default is coercion, then you're going to have a problem. And eventually somebody's going to roll a grenade in the room with you, figuratively or literally. And so in special forces, it's like it's understood that you have to have a baseline capacity for surgical coercion, for surgical lethality. And our guys and girls train their ass off for that. And they are always ready to do that. And they're very good at it and they're very proficient at it. But as a general rule, they don't lead with it. They can, and they have. But as a general rule, that's not where their unique capability is the capability to go into a place, and if the elder reaches for the AK, they can take care of business and walk away to fight another day or to influence another day. But their goal is there to influence that elder to pick up that T and to gain 8 more seconds in his attention span, to build enough rapport that you start to get a little bit of connection there, and then a little bit more and a little bit more, until ultimately you're walking around outside and you're getting stories about the micro history of the place and what happened, and you get to the bottom of why that bombing occurred, and maybe you can atone for it, and maybe you have a feast or a dinner, or maybe there's a project that you can help do that will get them back on their feet, and then more reciprocity and more social capital, right? The depth and breadth of one's social relationships is critical here, not just for happiness, but for getting big shit done. And so that avatar is not John Wick. That avatar is Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, right? The 1917 World War I former British geologist turned intelligence officer who basically walked into modern day Syria, and through relationships that were pre-existing from his time as a geologist and just an appreciation of the human operating system, he built relationships with the Bedou tribes that encouraged them, and used narrative skills, narrative competence, storytelling, painted a picture of the city of Aqaba, the crown jewel of the Ottoman Empire, that these tribesmen could liberate when no one else could. They could actually come across the desert. And from his time as a geologist, he knew the guns pointed toward the sea, and he told stories of what could be. He presented new patterns in their brain of what if they were to liberate the crown jewel from the Ottoman Turks, what would that mean to them? And they did it. And Lawrence was a very valorous guy. He was awarded valorous awards several times, but he's not remembered for that. He's remembered for the Lawrenceian skills of human connection, narrative competence, active listening, relationship building, rapport. These were and his understanding of tribal dynamics and local realities. That's what he's remembered for. And so, one of the things that I tell people is like the second avatar, the Lawrenceian, that's the weight of effort. And then finally is the Verizon guy. Remember the guy from the commercials? Can you hear me now? Good. Can you hear me now? Good. He'd pop up from a manhole cover. Good. And then pop up in the jungle. Can you hear me now? Good. And he had this obsession with connection. He was a catalyst. He was constantly building networks, right? Networks bigger than himself. I use that avatar to describe the third component. So each one of those has its own relevance, but that's not unique to Green Berets. I think in this time of churn, these unprecedented times we have, where we talked about all the things that are going on, you as a bottom-up leader, Courtney, who's building a movement around helping children cope with veteran suicide, she's going to have some level of surgical coercion, right? By that, I mean she is going to have to speak softly and carry a big stick, because at times she might deal with hard situations, not where she's going to deal out violence, but where she has to stand her ground. You see what I mean? And it has to be explicitly and prescriptively stated, because I said so. Like, there is a time and place for that, but that's at a baseline. And she needs to have enough capacity in her soul to stand for what she believes in. That's the John Wick stuff. By the way, John Wick, very, very, very effective in the application of his coercion, but very surgical. He's not a pray and spray guy, is he? Right? He's very surgical in the way he applies it, and frankly judicious about it. And those are all requisites that Courtney would have to display as she stands up this nonprofit. But the Lawrenceian skills, that's what Courtney's really going to need to be able to do. Like, she really needs to be able to bring those Lawrenceian skills to bear, man. The human connection skills, the narrative competence, the ability to use storytelling in real time to meet your goals, listening like your life depends on it. Because it's in building that social capital where she's going to have the real opportunity to move people to action. We're social creatures. The way we move people to action is how we inspire, how we teach, train, how we persuade, influence. That's our superpower. We don't have fur, fangs, or claws. We're not designed for lethal solutions. We can do it, But that's why anger is a secondary emotion, right? Our real superpower is human connection. It's atrophied since COVID, so it's about waking it back up. And in the time of churn, it causes us to go against it. But the Lawrenceian skills, you guys, those are the skills. All this bullshit about hard skills and soft skills, man, what a joke, right? The real hard skills are the soft skills, where the corporate eye rolls when you have the training on active listening and storytelling. The senior leaders roll their eyes, and it's something you do as a mandatory thing every quarter to satisfy the HR person. That's bullshit. The reality is, if you look at Lawrence of Arabia, what he's remembered for strategically is not his valor, even though he was valorous. It's what he did through those human connection skills. And throughout history, there are examples of this. The great influencers, right? Yes, you need the warriors and those that swing the big stick, but in the context of how you live your life and I live mine, it's all about influence. The Lawrenceian skills are where it's at, And then finally, the Verizon guy, like Courtney's got to build this network. How in the hell is she going to do that? That's a really big thing to do. Like, how are you going to you're going to have mental health professionals. You're going to have veteran representatives. You're probably going to work with first responders. She's one person. Well, she's that Verizon guy popping out of the foxhole or out of the manhole cover and then up in the jungle. She's building as a catalyst, as a super connector. She's building these networks around a wicked problem. I'll talk about that more in a second. But those are the three avatars that I think are just as appropriate for you leading in today's churn. The John Wick, the Lawrence of Arabia, and the Verizon guy. And guess what? Each of them has their own set of skills. Surgical coercion has its own set of skills, right? The ability to have a hard conversation with someone when you have to let them go. The Lawrenceian skills, a ton of those, right? And there's stuff out there on it, but training in storytelling, training in narrative, training in human connection, training in nonverbal physicality, breath work, how you negotiations. And then the newest one is the Verizon guy and how to build networks. The Starfish and the Spider is a great book on that. I talk about it in Game Changers. I talk about it, Nobody's Coming to Save You. There's a lot of stuff out there on it, but each of those has their own unique collective skills. And finally, what I'll say on those is that as a leader in today's churn, each of those represents the ingredients to a cocktail that's different for every problem you face. Some might require more John Wick. Some might require more Lawrenceian. Some might be completely remote, like Pineapple Express, and you need a whole lot of Verizon guy. You know what I mean? But the key is to understand those three avatars, how they can each combine, and that's where the art comes in, artistically, to solve these wicked problems that we face. And if you do that, you have real strategic potential to build communities in a time of churn, right? So now we've talked about the trance, which is your individual. We've talked about the three avatars, which is kind of the skill set. And then the final one is communities themselves. Communities are key, where we live, work, and play, where you live, work, and play. Physical communities that, I think Younger talked about, like during the World War II, when the Germans were bombing the UK, communities would go down into the subways. And you would think with that incessant bombing and just everyday chaos and terror that suicide would go up, right? No, it actually went down. Suicide went down in London during the bombing because communities came together, right? Universal suffering, a community of sufferers, as Sebastian Younger calls it. The point here is that as we go through this churn, if we can be bound as communities, physical communities, there's a real opportunity here to weather the storm. All right. I will just say that where you live, work, and play, there are some things that you can do on that. Just three principles I'll give you real quick. One, if you're going to bring your community together, you want to do that when risk is low, not when the churn is high. Now, granted, we live in a time of churn, so like pick your poison. But if you're waiting for the next COVID, God, I hope that doesn't happen. But if you are, that's not the time to try to go build your community. The reason I wrote The Gathering Storm, a book I didn't want to write about what I think is, and others think is, a potential terror attack on our soil again that's worse than 9/11. The time to get communities talking about this and working with local law enforcement in a private, public way and federal is not after the attack occurs. One of the soft truths is you can't create special operations forces after an emergency occurs. Well, guess what? You can't create cohesive communities. Now, they might come together in a crisis like they did in the hurricane in Western North Carolina, but those communities understand they were together long before that. And it was the institutions that were not connected as well as they could that really fell short. And even the veteran communities that rushed in and helped, they were together before that. My point here is simply that communities are great, but you build trust at a community level, and many of our communities are fractured. You can't just assume that they're going to weather the storm, right? And when communities are going through stuff, they've already been tested so many times that if social capital is frayed, it'll fracture. Let me give you an example. I may get some hate mail on this, but I stand beside it, is East Palestine, where the chemical spill happened with the train. That little community came together in some ways, but it's fractured in many ways too. And a lot of it's because it's been fomented by outside bad actors, divisionist leaders who came in there and fomented instability and in-group, out-group behavior to advance their own fucking agenda. Right. But some of it's happened inside there too. Bad actors, some of it's legit, like the institutions have not stepped up. But all of that conspires to create a community that in the worst disaster in its history is actually floundering, not thriving. Now, somebody can hit me back with that. I welcome it, but this is feedback I've received from community members of late. It's a beautiful little community, and they're awesome people, and I spent time there, but they're struggling, right? And this is what I think can happen to any community. It's not just East Palestine. It's anywhere where we operate that you're going through it, man. And just because the community's been around for a lot of years doesn't mean that it can't fracture and go into all kinds of challenges. So if you're going to reestablish social capital, building that trust when risk is low, and then you leverage it when the stakes are high. In doing that, the big thing I say is make a human connection first, man. Like if you remember anything from today, whether you're negotiating, whether you're building a new relationship, whether you're sitting down with the sheriff for the first time or a loan officer at a bank, make a human connection first, right? Human connection, look them in the eyes, ask about their kids, whatever it is. If you're just open to the fact that you need to do it, your body knows what to do. It knows how to attune and go into discovery and curiosity mode and just make that human connection first. Like that's just something nobody does anymore. Everybody goes right to the agenda, right to the slides. And then the relationship is the asset. I don't know why we think that like we can behave differently as politicians and diplomats and intelligence officers and senior military officers than what our our parents taught us to fucking do in kindergarten. I mean, on what planet can you abandon a 20-year ally that you fought with in combat who has risked everything and done 95% of the fighting? I'm talking about the commandos in particular, the Afghan commandos, and then turn the page on them like a ServPro commercial like it never even happened. And think that somehow you just get a relationship mulligan in life. If we go back to Afghanistan, it'll be fine. The commando over there in tattered rags whose wife's been executed and his children taken from him, that's like glaring at me with lasers in his eyes, he's good. I'm just going to give him a suitcase full of cash. Don't turn your back on that dude. Like we just made the work a lot harder for the next generation of Green Berets, our kids. Because we didn't realize that the relationship is the asset. That's just one example. We're doing that right here at home, right? We squander relationships in favor of fomenting our own narrow instability to advance our own narrow agenda. And so as a result of that, we don't value the relationship. We have to do that. We just have to be this way. We have to realize that in business, life, family, relationships are the asset. Social capital is the oldest form of capital in the world. It's how we've always survived. And it's not going to change in our lifetime. But yet today, most people are so transactional that they look at a relationship as the way to get something. And that's not true. The relationship is actually the asset. Your book of business is your relationship portfolio. And you mark my words, in the next crisis, the leaders who have the best relationship portfolios are the ones we're going to follow. And they're the ones that are going to thrive while everybody else is surviving, barely, if not at all. Finally, I encourage you when you think about communities to think about communities of practice. It's not just physical communities. In this time that we live in, we talked about the podcast and how we can assemble virtual communities. Yes, the digital realm is fraught with dangers, and I am cautionary about those because we cannot forget our human operating system as we go into these represented domains. But there is also a ton of good that can happen from it. Courtney has at her disposal, as she builds this nonprofit around helping kids cope with the loss of loved ones through suicide, she has a virtual community that she can build. And as she tells her story and she talks about what she's building on these various platforms, I'm going to bring her on my podcast, hopefully. We want to work with her. The same way that when Nizam, my buddy from Afghanistan, reached out for help, and I reached out to a couple of people, it started with 5 veterans who knew and loved Nizam. And then he uttered the words pineapple to the Marines and the guards, and they let him in. And then that story got told, and we became Task Force Pineapple. And today, it's a book that has been shared by thousands to help people understand what happened, not just with Pineapple, but with other groups. It's a universal story. It's going to become a one-person play that I'm working on right now. I'm a big believer in these communities of what I call communities of practice, right? Basically, these are virtual communities that form around wicked problems. And they can be physical communities too, but they are groups of people, practitioners, that's why a community of practice, who come together to solve a problem. Now, I've heard them called communities of interest. My part on that is General Scott Miller used to say, we got enough communities of interest. We got enough people standing around with their hand in their pockets admiring the problem. Right? This is a community of practice. These are practitioners who come from different worlds. Like, for example, the community of practice that she might build would include suicide prevention experts. It might include mental health experts. It might include donors. It might include survivors of suicide. It might include veterans. It might include media, right? But she builds this vast, deep and broad, eclectic group around one thing, a wicked, ill-structured problem, suicide, and the impact it has on our children, right? That is a very well-framed problem. And now you start using the Verizon guy network. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? That obsession for connection and the Lawrenceian skills to make connections and bring those people in to tell the story of what you're building, of Aqaba, right, in the virtual sense. And if you have a bad actor in there that makes their way in and starts spewing, you may have to break out a little John Wick and cut that person from the group. Are you with me? That's basically what a community of practice offers you. The Starfish and the Spider by Ari Brofman and Rob Beckstrom are great for that. Also, Nobody's Coming to Save You. We have a chapter on that in social, and then also in Game Changers. It's in there as well. But it's communities of practice where you're the catalyst in there. You're the connector who doesn't need the credit. You're just running the seams, making the connections. It's a very, very powerful thing you could do with myopic and obsessive focus on the wicked problem and swarming on that wicked problem with this community of practice, ultimately getting it tamed to the point that you can solve it, right, over the long term. I think the last thing I'll say is when we put the book out, I became really concerned about the churn in our society. And someone mentioned to me this platform called School, SKOOL, that Sam Oven started, and Alex Hermosi is a big backer of. And I went into it, and Colin was in it with me, and we were looking at it, and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. But it seemed to me that a lot of the communities that you build these communities, and it's cool because it's online. You go in there, and the community can be anything from starting a podcast to learning to play guitar. And you build that community. You host it for like $99 a month. It can be free, or people can pay to be in there. And then it can be on any topic you want. And then it's gamified, where not only do you present content in there, you can you have an interactive calendar where you can tell when your Zoom meetings are, your calls. There's places for classroom and content on video. But I like it also because it's gamified. So like the more engaged you are with other people in the community, because that's a big part of the community, isn't it? Right? It's not just the leader, it's the engagement and the bottom-up conversations that happen. That's where the real magic is. It gamifies it where you go like from 1 to 9. And, for us, it starts with like tire kicker, and then it goes up to like very advanced master of human connection. And we're like, screw it, man, let's start it. And so we started this thing. We made it a free community, started in January. And we just started reaching out to people that I knew, that I'd coached with, that had been in my mastermind. And I was like, hey, before I turn the lights on in this thing, we're going to call it the Scott Mann Leadership Academy. Come in here and do what you know how to do. And we put business rules in there. Like, for example, in that room, in that community, we don't talk about the issues. We talk about how we treat each other around the issues. Because guess what? I got Democrats in there. I got Republicans in there. I got progressives. I got conservatives. I got Canadians. I got Australians. I've got folks from Africa. I've got folks from Latin America. That's not the point. The point is that the whole purpose for that Scott Mann Leadership Academy is to learn more about purpose and human connection so that you can influence more effectively in the context of your world. I mean, I frankly don't give a shit what your issues are. Like, that's yours to go solve. Like, I wanted a community where we can talk about how we treat each other in the context of the issues. And that's the only way you can be in that community. And it's self-policing. Like, now people know, like, if you don't do that, you are removed from the community. John Wick, right? And it is, I think we're right around 200 members. And it's amazing the stuff that has happened. I mean, from improving funding for the almost extinct black-footed ferret to Courtney's, suicide support for children that are going through it. For-profit folks are in there getting work. The point is, like, this is community, and it's available to each and every one of us, right? Like, we'll put the link in there. I'd love to. It's free to join. We'd love to have you in there. But I think probably my message to you too is start your own. Like, whether it's in school or whether it's on a podcast or whether it's physically in your community around, forming a travel ball team that didn't exist for a sport that, maybe females have never been able to play before or something. I don't know. But, like, wherever the wicked problem lives, be Dr. Bob and Bill W. and have a meeting and start working it bottom up and put these skills to play. Right. And you may want to go back and watch this a couple times. There's one other thing that I will say is that we have this, there's these podcast episodes, and I'll get Colin to put the link to them. They're called the Waterline episodes, Waterline articles. And it's a tip of the hat to Lawrence of Arabia, but he wrote the 27 articles where he passed off information for British officers that would replace him working with the tribes, and they're actually really good. You should look them up sometime. They're called Lawrence of Arabia's 27 articles. But I did 27 Waterline articles from the iceberg, the human operating system that's in the book Nobody's Coming to Save You. Just rules of the road, 27 things. You might check those out too, along with this podcast. Listen to it a couple times, but honestly, man, I think there's a lot at our disposal. And I hope there's a lot of tangible tactics here for you to sink your teeth into. I hope that you'll join us on the Scott Mann Leadership Academy, on school. I also hope that you will share this podcast. Look, we are in it right now. And I think my dad would be proud and honored if you watch this, if you take notes on this, if you get out there and lead in your community, in your family, in your nation, and you share. Share this podcast, share some of the resources that we've talked about in here. This is not us admiring the problem. This is us swarming on the problem as a community and as individuals in a community. So I hope this serves you. I hope I didn't leave anything out. I know we covered a lot of ground, but, I'm honored that we're able to do this. And last thing I'll say is, whatever you're building, my friend Bo taught me this. He said, Americans and others, we love to be around leaders who are building things, even if they're not built yet, especially if they scare the shit out of us. I can't tell you how many times when I talked about the play that I was building, and I would say, help me build it. This is what I'm building. Help me build it. And because Bo taught me to say that, man, the people that came to my aid, one of the last ones was Gary Sinise. He said, I'll help you build it, Scott. And by God, he did. It took that play to a whole new level, and it's still touring now, and I'm not even in it anymore, but it's still touring and it's still helping people. What are you building? Tell people, help me build it. And then go out there and put these skills to use and build the communities that are the antibodies to the churn that we need. Thanks for what you do, and I'll see you on the rooftop.